become more competitive, then we are on the way to making our contribution toward that solution.
Damos la bienvenida ahora a Tecate, Baja California, a esta televideoconferencia del Centro de Capacitación para el Trabajo Industrial. Adelante, Tecate.
Bueno, entonces, marque el 8165.
Bueno, parece que tenemos problema en la línea, entonces, Tecate no está listo. Sí, Tecate, lo escuchamos. Bueno, parece que se cortó la línea. De todas maneras, vamos a dar paso a un fax que nos enviaron de la Organización de Estados Americanos en Washington. Dice, el estilo de trabajo
The style of work and decision making in Latin America is a very different one from the United States and Canada. How can you talk about a Latin American focus of reengineering?
Yes, all of our countries have different cultures, and yes, we probably have different management styles and so forth. But really what we're talking about here is something that's universal among all peoples. We have to make, perhaps, some adjustments by country. But when you stop to think of a lot of the things that we borrowed from Japan, on consensus management, for example, we've had to relearn how to really do consensus management in our country. But there's no reason. The point I'm going to make is that basically people want to do a good job. And people, when they go to work, really want to do the right thing. So basically, I think with that basic appeal to the inner instincts of people, there's no problem as far as making some adjustments to maybe some cultural differences in companies.
Tenemos otro participante, este viene de la Universidad.
Another one from Mexico.
Gracias. En base a su experiencia
Based on your experience with Ford Motor Company, how long do you think a company will take in implementing TQM, and how long do you think you would be able to see results?
Well, to answer that question, let's take a look at the size of a company. Let's take, for example, that you have a company maybe of 300 people. That is a site of 300 people. Then really what we're trying to do is to get the TQM process and get people trained in all these techniques, JIT, SPC, and so forth. So really to impart these techniques to the critical mass, maybe 100 people or 500 people in a company, you could probably do several flights a day. It probably lasts for about 25 weeks. So the factor is the urgency of the whole process.
Bienvenido ahora a la participación de la Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México,
Now from the Federal District, Mexico. Sound is bad. This is from the vet school. We have two questions. The first question is, in a multiple process enterprise like an industry, a food industry, what would be the first way of applying a reengineering process? And the second question is it more expensive to pay cash instead of asking credit to suppliers?
Multiple process industry, the food industry. Once we go through the initial assessment of a company, and once they know what their goals are, and they have some idea of where waste is taking place, the opportunities to get an edge on the competition, we then concentrate on that particular process. It might take, it really depends upon the process itself, the new technologies that are available to improve that process, and as far as how long it would take, it's a very hard question to answer because it really depends upon the complexity of the process, whether or not you have internal resources to help in the process, and so forth.
Tenemos otro participante en esta oportunidad. Viene
We have another participant
del Instituto Tecnológico
from
de Tehuacán,
Mexico, Tehuacán.
Buenos días.
Good morning.
Aurora González. La pregunta es,
The question is, what does reengineering tell us about the prospective design in order to reduce the speed of obsolescence of the products?
What does reengineering do to affect the speed of obsolescence in a product or a process? Certainly what it does is it brings the process up to date with the benchmark, the best process of that type in the world, theoretically. If we're really going to do a thorough job, we would go out and investigate and find out what company has this process, how they're doing it, and what they have done. And then, of course, we try to bring our process up to that. But at the same time, while we're doing business process reengineering, we are instituting the idea of continuous improvement. We are not locking a process into a specific situation in January of 1995. The people in the process themselves are now being empowered, and they go out and continuously tweak and improve the process to keep it up to date. What has happened so far is we have situations where we put people into a process. They have no idea, because they're task-oriented, of what's going on out in the rest of the world. And then all of a sudden, all these dramatic changes that have taken place incrementally over the years now come to place where we have to make a dramatic change in the whole process. So there are prevents in this whole system. With continuous improvement, with people understanding and being trained in the techniques of continuous improvement, we can make the incremental changes from month to month or year to year to keep the process updated.
Otra participación vía fax, este viene de COBAES, Colegio de Bachilleres en
This is another
Culiacán,
fax
Sinaloa.
question.
No es demasiado
Isn't
drástico el
reengineering
enfoque de
too
reingeniería
drastic
para las
an
organizaciones
approach
públicas,
for public
cuyas
organizations,
estructuras son establecidas muchas
the
veces
structures of which
por
are
leyes
established
y
in many
reglamentos?
instances by laws and regulations?
We have, of course, this situation occurring all the time in the United States. One thought that comes to mind, let's talk about regulated industries. I'm talking about the medical device industry, for example, FDA regulated. I'm talking about the aerospace industry. These industries, yes, they have their difficulties in making change because there are regulations. But because government is working from their standpoint, to politics and so forth, that we really have to become more efficient in what we're doing. And because the suppliers in these regulated environments are also working, questions are being asked now that should have been asked many years ago. And there is quite a movement taking place to make these changes.
Otra pregunta, esta nos llega del Instituto Tecnológico
Another question from Apatzingan, Mexico.
Siga usted.
Sí, muy buenos días.
Buenos días.
Estamos hablando del Instituto Tecnológico Superior de Apatzingán. Queremos hacer 4 preguntas.
We would like to ask 4 questions. One of them is, once TQM is already being applied, can you also apply BPR simultaneously, and what are the problems that we have?
If TQM has already been applied, if people really understand what it embraces, continuous improvement and so forth, if they have been trained in systematic problem solving and all the techniques, they are really in very good shape for tackling a BPR project. And of course, I think that really the steering committee for TQM can identify the process in a company that really should be the first one to be worked on. But yes, that's why my recommendation is to get the critical mass in a company trained to continuous improvement, skilled in some of the techniques, and then take on the BPR process.
Tenemos otra pregunta vía fax de la Comisión
Another
Federal de
question comes
Electricidad
via fax
en Mérida,
from Mérida, Yucatan.
Dice, en TQM,
In
los propios
TQM,
trabajadores a través de
the
los
workers
círculos de calidad
themselves, through
analizan y proponen
circles of
sus
quality,
mejoras
analyze and propose their
En reenginería,
continuous
¿qué
improvement. In
niveles deben
reengineering, what are the
hacer las
levels
correspondientes?
that have to do the analysis and the presentations?
The middle management would probably be more heavily involved in a BPR project. But there's nothing to restrict the workers, the process workers themselves from getting involved. They would have to, as long as the people involved are skilled in doing analysis and so forth, but some of this, of course, is a result of TQM training. Anything that is identified, yes, they're going to need support to do a thorough job, and they're going to have the approval of management if they have to go outside the company to really take a look at other companies, benchmark other companies to see what is best.
Bien, ahora retornamos a Sudamérica, Paraguay.
Now we have
De la
South America,
Universidad
Paraguay,
Católica
from the
Nuestra
Catholic
Señora de la
University of
Asunción.
Asunción.
Tiene la siguiente participación. Adelante, Paraguay.
Question. A question from the medical center. What experience do you have of applying BPR in medical services enterprises where 80% of their professionals are hired on a per contract basis?
I have worked in a couple of hospitals in Los Angeles, and of course, yes, a lot of their workers, nurses and so forth, are hired under a contract basis, but there is a great need for change. That really some of the processes we have, for example, in our hospitals are very wasteful, and they're also very slow in time, the admitting process and so forth. As far as contract workers are concerned, we have similar problems in the United States. A large percentage of our working population is a part-time help. But as long as we have the core of the company involved and loyal to the company, then we have no problem of putting this in, putting the TQM process in.
El siguiente participante nos
Next
llama desde la
participant
Comisión Federal de Electricidad en México.
is from Mexico Federal District. Good morning. I have a question for you. Is it possible to apply BPR in public administration?
Yes, very much. Very much so. In fact, a lot of our governments here are in the process of putting in TQM. Let's talk, for example, the assessor's offices. We could talk about law enforcement. We could talk about garbage disposal, all those kinds of things. People get trained in how can we do things better.
Tenemos ahora una pregunta.
Now we have a question coming from Panama.
En Panamá, de la Universidad
From the Technological University in Panama. Welcome, Panama. What are the recommendations for a country, for a developing country who is in the process of opening up to foreign markets and that has enterprises that want to apply reengineering?
I would not wait. I would get started now. You know, it's pretty much, you probably can see through the fog and so forth what is probably going to transpire as you open your markets up. There's a competitive threat from other companies moving in and perhaps putting some of your existing companies under concern. At the same time, the products that you are selling or the materials that you are selling now are open up to the world marketplace. So really it's important that we have everybody thinking about how we can help mobilize the workforce, because it's really their livelihood too. You know, how can we make our companies more competitive?
Gracias, señor Wolf. Continuamos ahora con el módulo.
Now we are going to continue with Module 2, where Mr. David Chaudron will explain the various ways in which organizations handle organizational change and implement the concept of reengineering with a tale of three villages.
Perhaps the least answered question in business today is, what can we do to make our business survive and grow? The world is rapidly changing into something that's too complex to easily predict, with 100 opportunities and pitfalls passing by every moment. To add to this confusion, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of techniques, solutions, and methods that claim to help businesses improve their levels of productivity, quality, and customer satisfaction. A company president, CEO, or business owner has so many choices in these buzzwords, whether they be called total quality management, customer satisfaction, reengineering, or team building. They are like new shoppers in a giant grocery store. You are hungry, but there are so many brands, sizes, and varieties you don't know what to buy. In response to this confusion, many do nothing, often afraid of making the wrong choices. Others change their techniques every few months using the programme du jour method of organizational change. Neither of these responses help the organization in the long run. Changing nothing will produce nothing. Implementing a different buzzword, total quality, just in time, reengineering, etc., every few months often creates a whipsaw effect that causes mass confusion among your employees. These buzzwords are often a hammer in search of a nail techniques applied with no clear focus as to the why, expected results, or return on investment. Organizations need to move beyond these buzzwords into deciding what actions they need to perform that will help them grow and develop. In response to this problem, this session will provide you with a framework for coping with organizational change, independent of buzzwords or the latest management fad. First, let's talk about building this framework. This framework has 4 parts. First, you must decide where you should be going. This involves defining what the vision, mission, and goals of your organization should be in the foreseeable future. As a result of this exercise, we can divide this future into 3 broad categories. The future will be just like the present, it will be modestly different from now, or it will be radically different from now and or highly unpredictable. Just like the picture of the mountain, we must decide if we want to stay at the bottom, move up a little, or try for the summit. This particular step is very important. IBM in the mid-1980s felt that the future should be just like the past. They did not realize how easily microcomputers would replace the functions of their bread and butter business, the mainframe. The net result so far has been tens of thousands of people laid off, with the company suffering the first losses in its history. It is still an open question if they can be turned around quickly enough to compete with its rapidly growing, quick-acting competitors. The second part of the framework involves deciding where you are. As in the previous exercise, we divide this present into 3 broad categories. Happiness where events are going well, slow decline in productivity, quality, market share, or customer satisfaction, and impending disaster. Like our businessmen in the picture, we can relax in the sunshine, have a few problems, or await the disaster. An example of one organization having a flat or declining market share is Kaiser Permanente, a health maintenance organization in the United States. It underwent rapid growth in the 1980s due to its low costs in providing health care. As a result, they expanded rapidly. When new competitors came into the marketplace, this growth flattened rapidly, leaving them with much overcapacity. The third part of the framework is where you decide the methods and techniques to use. These techniques fall into 2 broad categories: incremental approaches and reengineering, restructuring approaches. Please listen to the following story that illustrates the differences between these approaches. Once upon a time, there were 3 villages. These villages depended heavily on the trade from across the valley for their prosperity. The bridge across this valley needed repair. The chief from the first village told his workers, "Go forth and work. Do whatever is necessary." He dumped a huge assortment of tools in front of them, then quickly left. The villagers established a frenzied pace, for this chief abused his workers who did not follow his commands. The first chief boasted to the 2 other leaders about the speed of his construction. Unfortunately, because no one coordinated these workers' efforts, the bridge was a haphazard collection of nails and boards. It soon collapsed under the usual wear and tear. Needless to say, the villagers were unhappy with their chief and soon disposed of him. The second chief was watching this mess and decided to learn from the first chief's mistakes. She organized her workers into teams and gave them a plan to repair the existing bridge. At first, these workers had success and rebuilt the bridge straight as an arrow far across the chasm. She boasted to the 2 other chiefs about the accomplishments of her workers. Unfortunately, the bridge could only be repaired so far. During the next heavy storm, the bridge collapsed, for the chief did not know how to build structural supports. Her workers became discouraged and abandoned their efforts. The third chief was watching their efforts and decided to learn from the other chief's mistakes. He sent his workers to the other villages to learn what they had done and what they hadn't done. His workers then developed a plan. In their first step, they did not build a bridge at all, but focused on something entirely new: the airplane. This was an entirely new solution to their transportation problem. Many organizations are like the first village in implementing total quality management. They start with vague directives with little clarity on what to do. Their successes are sporadic and likely to fail. This is what I call the go forth and do anything incremental approach. One of the organizations I consulted with started on this path. Senior management proclaimed in a memo that total quality should be a way of life. One senior vice president declared that he wanted 25% of his organization using total quality tools within a year. This caused tremendous excitement in the organization. However, the follow-through was delayed, occasionally inappropriate, and sometimes not there. Many employees became discouraged with the process and considered it just another management fad. With the next business downturn, virtually all training had stopped and little enthusiasm was left. Other organizations are like the second village and clearly focus on technical problems and on improving what they have. They're initially successful, but become victims of their own success. I call this an improved incremental approach. Their initial quality improvement teams may be so successful, they rapidly create more teams without the qualitative organization-wide changes, such as reengineering, necessary to sustain a permanent effort. One organization we work with had over 70 quality improvement teams in a plant with only 300 employees. They had shown few results after their first successes and asked us what their next step should be. We suggested bringing in the union's leadership into their effort, restructure their organization to more product-focused lines, and possibly start profit sharing. They were not interested in taking any of these actions. A few months later, its parent company shut down the site, partly because of poor productivity. Another organization we work with assembled an improvement team to increase the quality of one product. This 12-person team had great difficulty accomplishing its function. We found they had been given an impossible task. They had made some progress in reducing product defects, but were severely hampered by little authority to do anything. We recommended that either, one, they eliminate the team, thereby reducing the frustrations their employees felt, or two, restructure the organization so management could focus on this particular product. Management was unwilling to make any substantive change, so they disbanded the team. Product quality, again, deteriorated. A different organization had a more positive response with the incremental approach. We trained an internal facilitator, helped them deliver training in a just-in-time fashion, and had them focus on specific technical problems. The team's management formed reduced initial quality by 48%. Returning to the story, the third village illustrates the reengineering approach. Not content with merely improving what they had, they created a new solution to their problem. The third village did not build a bridge at all, but an airplane. This solution would meet their needs, but had little to do with the existing way of traveling across the valley. Examples of organizations using these methods include Hallmark Card, Ford, and IBM Credit. To summarize, some organizations implement TQM like the first village, in that management mostly talks about quality, there is little action but much paper, and their training is poorly focused. They often provide massive training and quality tools, but without follow-through or implementation. Organizations that implement TQM like the second village define their technical problems, focus their training efforts, and provide management support and involvement. The advantages to this approach include a focus on action, it can be started quickly, and can be initiated by those with less authority. The disadvantages of such an incremental approach include avoiding structural, system-wide problems, and assuming that existing processes need modest improvement. In addition, using incremental approaches can be frustrating to employees and management if TQM does not catch on in the organization. As a result of these disadvantages, many organizations experience a high risk of failure in the long run. Other organizations, like the third village, use reengineering to make a quantum leap in their productivity, customer satisfaction, and profitability. They decide who their customers are and what lines of business they should be in. They redesign from scratch their fundamental business processes. They are not repairing a bridge, but are creating a whole new way of getting there. Organizations using restructuring may also use team building to create a more tightly focused management team, or to change their organizational structure, compensation system, performance appraisal, information system, or even their management style. They are leaping into the unknown with all the risks and potential that it entails. In addition to the organization's future state, its present state, and its methods, organizations must also make 3 additional decisions. What the measures of success should be, how much employee involvement in the process they need, and the sequence of implementation. Without measures of success, the organization does not know if it has succeeded in its efforts. Someone once said, "What gets measured gets improved." Someone else said, "If you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there." Some organizations involve employees right from the start, where they have significant influence in the strategic plan of the organization. This kind of involvement tends to reduce employee resistance, which is also a very important factor in the success of any organizational change. Such organizations as Eaton, Eastman Chemical, and Roman Haas have used such an approach. Employee involvement, however, might also be threatening to management's traditional power. Some organizations decide employee involvement should be limited to implementing strategic decisions management makes, or further limit involvement to purely task-focused teams working on technical problems. Many aerospace organizations have used this approach. The sequence of implementation is also an important factor. There are 4 basic options with many variations on these. The first involves the entire organization from the start, with the whole organization intensively working at once to make the change. Ford Motor Company is currently restructuring its entire organization, moving from planning to implementation in 9 months. Another option is a more relaxed approach, in which divisions or business units of the organization go at their own pace. This option can often become an incremental approach as practiced by the first or second village. Many conglomerates or other companies with diverse operations try this approach. A third option is similar to the previous one, with the focus being on individual business units doing the implementation. In this case, however, business units implement roughly the same things at roughly the same time. Unisys, the computer company, is using this method on some of its organizational change efforts. A fourth option is to create a pilot project in one division or business unit, learn from its mistakes, and then apply these lessons to the rest of the organization. Examples of this option include the Saturn car facility at General Motors and the Enfield plant at Digital Equipment Corporation. It's important to note here that creating pilot projects is a high-risk business. In both cases, the lessons learned from these pilot projects have not gained widespread acceptance in their parent companies due to their heavily ingrained cultures. Between all of these options, the most important difference is the pace of change. Based on the analysis I've described here, you must be the one to decide how quickly you must change. All the training, education, information, or consultants in the world will do you no good without the willingness to make decisions. The more slowly you go, the easier the transition. However, you may miss some wonderful opportunities. The American car companies in the early 1970s is an example. The more quickly you go, usually the more stressful it is in the short run. If change is done too quickly, without adequate thought, planning, or involvement by the right people, chaos can result. One aerospace plant in California relieved everyone from their positions of authority within a single day. They then reevaluated their management pool against new criteria of leadership. The net result was chaos